There is this belief that global citizens are made up of conscience, emotions, heart, mind, soul, and spirit, according to Craig von Buschek. As a media arts specialist, licensed cultural practitioner, Buschek's expression activated my intellect to the extent I became very enthralled with the quincentennial question, is there anything new under the sun? This admission, I suppose, like anything else, creates space for an analytical, intellectual conversation, and in any attempt to fully ventilate this question must be discussed factually, theoretically, and pragmatically, but within a cultural context. This reasoned conversation, in my view, summarizes global citizens are human beings, and metaphorically, they function as the conduits of identities such as class, culture, ethnicity, gender, hierarchy, ownership, and race. In such a context, it makes you wonder if these said identities identified in this discussion would behave like music, since they are everywhere. In this environment, it is only logical to assume that since this question is practical and relevant, it comprises people. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that the same can be interpreted as widespread. These identities previously mentioned are signifiers which are used to categorize, to mark, to identify, to profile, and to showcase people everywhere within a specific space and time is evident within any society. What is also equally important, an individual's orientation and identity perhaps may influence their understanding during this discussion. Consequently, it makes one wonder if the people who are considered as conduits become extinct, then it is highly probable that their culture, their diaspora, their heritage, and their ancestry may all become suspended indefinitely. Further, it should be noted that when all the historical data pertaining to this conversation is analyzed, it should help in determining relevance, influence, and what type of impact, if any at all, it would have imposed upon humans within the pre-BC and the post-AD space. The aforementioned evaluation, in my view, forms part of the basic principle of this deep thinking, pertinent question, is there anything new under the sun? In my assessment, this theme comports itself in ad nauseam way, even a recurring decimal or the waves of the sea, since it has a tendency to behave somewhat like music as it occupies the historical, political, post-colonial, and post-modern landscape BC and AD. John Fiske has argued that music is like a popular culture that is everywhere, as it provides substance to this debate and certainly helps the populace to answer the said question, but in the context of space. Cultural theorist Elaine Baldwin also joins the discourse and argues that space is the representation and part of the construction of culture and ways we live out our lives. Therefore, examining what can be considered as a cultural expression, since it is not a soliloquy, but a paradoxical question which makes human beings complicit. It is for all of the aforementioned reasons that A. It begs the quincentennial question, is there anything new under the sun? And B. Why I was challenged and motivated to answer the same in my capacity as a media arts specialist. Of note, the said people who presumably can be considered as conduits of identities, namely class, culture, ethnicity, gender, hierarchy, ownership, and race, etc., which function at points of identification according to Stuart Hall. These identities help to A. define, B. identify the said people who occupied the BC space and their generation who are still residing in the said global AD space, and C, at the same time quantifying what can be considered a popular culture. In this context, for anything, namely the title of this text, Is There Anything New Under the Sun, to become a popular culture, it must be consumed by all inclusive class, culture, ethnicity, gender, hierarchy, ownership, and race. According to John Fiske, popular culture as a provoking conversation must be taken up by the people. Fiske's definition of popular culture has merit and is applicable to this conversation since it is applied in context. I suppose that after much deliberation, one can assume that such a provoking question would have and continues to pervade the mind of most human beings, everywhere in every culture. Correspondingly, in light of the aforesaid admission, it begs the question, is there anything new under the sun? Which can be considered a coincidental question. It is paradoxical. It is not a soliloquy. It is a cultural expression. It makes people of every century complicit. It does not discriminate, but people do because of their identity. Conversely, this factually pragmatic theoretical question has seemingly provoked an analytical conversation because we are witnessing a revolution in knowledge in this 21st century. Such an admission presumably draws immense attention to the pertinent deep-thinking philosophical question, is there anything new under the sun? The same seemed to have baffled the populace for decades. Hence, I was motivated to rationalize in